From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. Andrew with you once again. I am joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka Deeper3. Derek, NBA 2K has, in many ways, been the gold standard for retro content, certainly since NBA 2K11. But that content isn't perfect, and there's more that they could do. We and our fellow basketball gamers have some thoughts on that, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, today's episode is all about the future of retro content in the NBA 2K series. We asked you, the listener, your thoughts, and what you would like to see, and we're also going to weigh in as well. So I want to kick this off by stating the retro content is still a big deal. I think you would agree. And when I say retro content, I also mean classic content, so whichever word you want to use. But there are hundreds of thousands of downloads related to classic team content, related to eras content, etc. And there's a reason for that, and it's because a lot of the younger crowd still wants to use those teams. They want to play those seasons. They want to learn about the history of the game. And then there's also a lot of people like you and I, Andrew, who grew up watching an NBA at a different time, basketball at a different time. We grew up watching, the NBA in the 90s, and we loved it. And we also have a lot of nostalgia for it. And the same with early 2000s, late 2000s, and mid 2010s. So I think that this content is downloaded by a lot of different demographics. And it's used in a lot of 2K's advertising. I think you would agree. Sometimes we see more advertising related to classic players and teams than we do the current NBA. For example, when you see, my team posts on Twitter, when you see on any of the other social media platforms, what are they mostly talking about? They're talking about classic players in my team, how to get them. Are they available during the season pass, etc. So I think that it's just such a big deal. And I'm going to throw it over to you in a second, but some of the content feels so empty. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the game's mechanics, which I don't think are as strong as they were when the retro content truly started to hit the ground running back with NBA 2K11. And I think that the gameplay has just gone downhill overall since the new motion system was implemented with NBA 2K18 and the revamp with 2K20. So the game's mechanics aren't as strong. I don't think the games are as fun as they used to be. Number one. Number two, the accuracy. And when I say empty content, this is part of it. The accuracy of those players and teams. It's so piss poor. It's such a rush job. It's such low priority for the company that it's even hard to use those teams, any of the teams. And you and I have tried to connect and play using those rosters many different times, and it just always bums us out, Andrew.
Yeah.
We just get super bummed out because the signatures are all over the place. Fast players aren't fast. You have guys that were super athletic that they move like slugs. They're not getting up and throwing it down. They're not getting it up and finishing strong, etc. You got good post players who can't buy a basket on the block or in the mid range, and guys that could shoot back then just bricking everything because their ratings are so off. There's just so many copy and paste jobs and whatnot. It feels hollow. Like, I don't know how else to put it. It just doesn't feel complete. It doesn't matter if you announce that, you have, a full season of teams that you can use from the past and players and whatnot, if it plays so poor, because gameplay is everything and respect is also everything. And there's a lot of lack of respect when it comes to the history of the game with those rosters and those teams.
Undoubtedly. And it's been a real shame to see. Like you say, we've tried to connect, we've tried to play with classic Sonics teams, with Kemp, trying to grab the rebound, get it on the break, go coast to coast with Kemp like he was able to, and you just can't. Because like you said, he's so sluggish, he doesn't have the dribbling ratings as well. You just can't play with these players as you're supposed to. And there is a lot of content, a lot of retro content in NBA 2K these days, which I do appreciate, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly become a case of quantity over quality, because you don't have that quality control, you don't have that attention to detail, as you said, so it's not fun to use. And to your point, the mechanics don't always help either. And it is a shame, because retro content, classic content, it's no longer just bonus content, Derek. This is staple content. Once they brought in the Jordan Challenge, once they decided, oh, we're going to have retro teams, classic teams, year after year, we're going to expand into My NBA eras, which again, very ambitious. I do appreciate a lot of the effort that's gone into those modes and that content, but if you're going to do that, you need to do it properly. And frankly, they're not.
Yeah, I want to use an example that might make sense to our listeners as well. If you have a car dealership and they consistently have 200 cars on their lot, but soon after people buy their cars, they break down, right? And how many times are you going to go back to that dealership when you need a new car, right? That's the way this feels to me. Like I put on my NBA eras roster and I put 2 teams on the floor, and they feel like crap. They're not shooting correctly. They're not playing correctly. It just bums me out. Then I put another 2 teams on the floor, the same thing. How many times do you think I'm going to want to go back and play those rosters? How many times am I going to want to go and put 2 more teams on the floor? Then if you have a situation where down the street there's a car dealership that has 40 cars on the lot at any given time, but people buy cars there and they don't break down immediately after. Those people go back, right? They're going to get another car from that dealership. They're going to write a good review on Google and whatnot. So, that's the way I look at it, is they have all of this content in the game right now. The My NBA eras, the all-time teams, they added classic teams, all of that stuff. Back in 2K21 was the last time they added classic teams, but there's still a ton of them in the game in the default roster. But the content and the way the game plays, but the content is so rushed and those teams play so poorly that a game with a much smaller selection of classic teams and way less content, you want to spend more time there, right? You want to spend more time on that game. You want to put more teams on the floor. You want to start a season with those teams. And that's the way I look at a game like NBA 2K11, right? Sure, there's not that much content in there as it relates to classic teams. It's only Jordan's opponents, right? And it's not all of them. But that game plays so well with those teams. And it's the same when, we revisit a lot of the classics like NBA 2K13 and we use classic teams in those games, etc. So I think that sometimes less is more if the accuracy is better, if there's more love put into that content. And I just don't see it. My wish, and I've been talking about this for 6 years with you on the podcast, various different shows, put people on the rosters who care.
Yes.
People who know basketball and that know their history. And unfortunately, the people that are working on those rosters do not. And I don't care if you throw out a name. I don't care if you say, well, they've been doing it for years. Go through those rosters, look at their ratings, look at their tendencies, look at the signatures, put them on the floor, see the way they play. The people that are working on these rosters, they do not care as much as they should. They can't know their history. And honestly, there's people out there that would do this for free that do know their history and understand, how these players played, how to make the signatures accurate, etc. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. One of the biggest things with this is getting people on these rosters, on these teams, on these players that care about the work they're doing. People that know basketball and know their history.
Absolutely. Again, quality over quantity. And it's the other way around at the moment. And you can say, oh, it's a low priority. It's supposed to be about the current NBA. But this is a big chunk of the game. This is a big selling point. My NBA eras, multiple eras that you can go back. A very exciting feature. It's a very cool feature in theory. In execution, it could be done a lot better. the accuracy of the players, the accuracy of the branding changes. And obviously the infrastructure is there for them to change the rules and to change the branding. And there's just so much mismatched branding that's been in there since 2K23. They haven't fixed that up. These are small fixes because the branding, or close enough branding, Derek, because sometimes there are minor changes that we can overlook if the same basic court or jersey essentially represents a big span of time. We can overlook a minor detail. But there are so many mismatched details. The Phoenix Suns bringing in the Sunburst jerseys but still having the old logos and the old court. The Houston Rockets have got mismatched branding as well, not changing properly throughout the years. Again, this is a core feature of that mode. And it's cool that it does change. It is working in so much as you are seeing rule changes, you are seeing teams enter the league, you're seeing branding changes, but there is so much more they could do as far as accuracy, so much more they should be doing as far as accuracy, because that is the point of the mode, just like the classic teams. So they really should be putting more effort into that. And yes, of course, making sure the players play correctly is paramount, because you can put up with that branding change, or you can fix it manually yourself a little bit quicker than editing hundreds of players in the league, admittedly. But still, it just speaks to that lack of authenticity, that lack of care, that lack of attention to detail. And again, this is a core feature, a core mode, a big selling point. It's no longer just bonus content. The Decade All-Stars, the All-Decade teams in NBA Live 2004, Derek, they don't have great ratings. A lot of those ratings need to be fixed up in the default rosters. And that's not good. But that was kind of a smaller part of that game. It didn't take as long to fix up those ratings. We shouldn't have to, but it is doable. This is a big selling point. Not to harp on the point, Derek, but this is a big selling point, a core feature of the game. You're saying, look at all this cool stuff we have. We're representing decades of NBA history, but you're doing it poorly, and it's not good enough.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of respect and the misrepresentation that probably pisses me off the most, right?
Yeah.
And it's the thing that bums me out the most. Not only that, the stuff that you're seeing with these players, all these inaccuracies, that's represented for these players in my team, Andrew. And that's a mode that people are pouring tons of money into. They're putting in a ton of money in the game to, open packs in order for a chance to get some of these classic players, all for them to get the classic player on the floor and him to play nothing like his real life counterpart. And I think that is incredibly scummy. I got to be honest with you. It more than bums me out. I think that it's taking advantage of people, right? And not only taking advantage of the consumer, I think it's taking advantage of the legends, of the classic players, right? It's taking advantage of everything. And I think it's very disappointing. My team also, because of so much misrepresentation in that mode over the years, that mode has just completely bummed me out as well. And the fact that you can get a guy like Shaq or Kareem in that mode and they can be out there dribbling like Steph Curry and shooting threes like Steph Curry, right? And whatnot. One of my ways to improve that mode in the future, we're talking about the future of retro content and classic content, what we would like to see is go back to where it wasn't all about that. And, if a player was great at something, make them great at it. And if they were weak at something or average, represent it that way. And that makes the mode more balanced. It makes you seek players for the right reasons based on the way they played, based on true history. And I think that would improve that mode quite a bit. But I wanted to bring up something real quick, Andrew. I want to talk about Rasheed Wallace and Charles Barkley real quick. Two names absent from the NBA 2K series over the years. Obviously, Charles Barkley in NBA 2K13 and NBA 2K17 allowed himself to be used exclusively on the Dream Team. But outside of that, he's been missing from the titles since NBA 2K6. But Rasheed Wallace said that he wasn't in NBA 2K because the company did not pay retired players fairly, specifically noting he was offered only $10,000 for his likeness. He said they need to CTC, cut the check, given how much money the game generates. And I just want to give you an idea of how much the game generates. So for NBA 2K26 as of December 31st, 2025. So this is only the game being out for a few months. NBA 2K26 sold approximately 8 million units, serving as a primary driver for Take-Two Interactive's strong fiscal third quarter 2026 performance, which included $1.7 billion in net revenue. The title's daily active users and recurrent consumer spending grew by 30% year over year, and that's the microtransactions, Andrew.
Yep.
Right, and it was the same with NBA 2K25. Their sales grew related to those microtransactions over 30% from what I'm reading. So 30% year over year. It is insane how much they're making. But yeah, they want to throw $10,000 at Rasheed Wallace and say, that's a fair offer. Let's get you in the game. Like, that is incredibly insulting. And then for Charles Barkley, he stated he refuses to be in NBA 2K until the publisher agrees to donate $1 million annually to the National Basketball Retired Players Association to support older players who did not make significant money. He has stated he will not allow his likeness to be used until this philanthropic demand is met. He stated, "My job is to take care of the older players," noting that many from previous eras did not receive the high salaries of modern players. So he's maintained this firm stance since 2016. So yeah, he believes they're not giving back enough. And I think he's also mentioned at one point how much money this company makes and that these players should be paid more in order to be represented in the games. But yeah, Rasheed Wallace and Charles Barkley standing their ground.
As they should. And I love to see it because they absolutely have a point about, you know, their own likenesses as far as Rasheed Wallace being offered a very lowball sum and Charles Barkley looking out for the retired players who didn't make as much money as he did. And obviously players make these days. And what's really scummy as well is that there's been some media outlets that have talked to 2K reps like Ronnie 2K and they've asked about Charles Barkley and said, oh, can we get him in the game? What's the likelihood of getting him in the game? And the response from 2K has always been to try and put it on Chuck, to try and kind of pressure him and like act like he's holding out or being unreasonable. Oh, you'll have to talk to him and oh, if he agrees to it and all this stuff. And it's like, you could afford to donate $1 million annually to the Retired Players Fund, considering how many retired players you have in the game, considering how many of them you're making money off of, not just selling the game on retro content, but then through the microtransactions of my team, you know, having those players in that mode, in the packs, people paying to rip open packs and get those players, you are profiting off their likenesses. So the least you could do, $1 million out of billions of dollars of revenue, is not a big ask. And again, Charles Barkley looking out for the previous generation, Rasheed Wallace pointing out that they're trying to lowball players, and Reggie Miller, I think, has said something very similar as well. He's another notable omission from the game. So it's ridiculous that they won't CTC, cut the check, but on top of that, trying to present these players as greedy or as unreasonable for not agreeing to be in the game when they have some very, very reasonable terms, especially the ones that Charles Barkley is putting forward. Yeah, it doesn't make the company look good at all.
And you know what? I think they miss a big opportunity here because if it was announced that Charles Barkley was in a new NBA 2K, that would aid their sales, Andrew. We've been hearing that people want Charles Barkley represented in the game for years. I absolutely think that it would help their sales just by getting him in there.
Oh, it'd pay for itself, yeah.
And also, if they did make that donation to the Retired Players Association, more than likely they could get other classic players, missing classic players into the game. And exactly. And if they did, and if that took place, then they could probably add some teams. Maybe they could add an ABA mode or an ABA season to my NBA eras. You know, there's a lot of opportunity there. Same with Sheed. That Detroit Pistons team in 03-04 looks stupid without him. So does the 99-2000 Blazers, right? So I think that he would also be a highly coveted player in my team. They would get people trying to open packs. They could tie Charles Barkley and Rasheed Wallace to season passes. You want Chuck? Here you go. And it could help their bottom line. So, like, I just think it's a huge missed opportunity. And I think it's unfair to the players from the past, you know, the Retired Players Association, etc.
Well, you know, I think it speaks volumes that Bill Russell isn't back in the game. And that may be a case of his estate doesn't want to grant the likeness rights because they're not really into games or whatever. But I think money is probably an issue as well. And again, disrespecting a legend who should be celebrated, who was in the game for years.
I mean, yeah, they've obviously added a lot of, classic teams, but notably missing is, the 64-65 Celtics, and also the 84-85 76ers, because they finally were like, yeah, this team doesn't make any sense without Charles Barkley. And then they lost the rights to Moses Malone, right? So why the hell would you even consider having the 84-85 76ers in there? In fact, I felt like it was insulting for years to have that team in the game without Charles Barkley on it. I also think it's very strange to have the 03-04 Pistons in there without Sheet on it, etc. It never made sense to me. Just like having certain classic teams in there where there was only 6 players that you could use. I just think that it's always been kind of low priority. But I wanted to talk about the accuracy thing real quick, Andrew. I'm sure you've seen this on social media, that some of the college content has been previewed. The new college content for NBA 2K26, the DLC, and whatnot. And there are rush jobs that are being pointed out all over the place. The wrong logo for teams, players' names being spelt incorrectly, etc. It looks like they're doing the same thing with the college content, even though this is supposed to be a huge deal. They intercepted the deal that was made with EA Sports, and now NBA 2K is getting the college content, and they're getting it sooner than we ever imagined. But boom, here come the inaccuracies. Here come the rush jobs, because it's not about how they play on the floor, in my opinion, to this company. It's not about representing the players and teams accurately. It's about saying that you have the content.
Yes.
Right?
Posting,
it's about being able to say, I have the content, we have the content first, and we're the only one that has this content. And then, pony up, right?
The exclusive home of basketball
gaming. Give us the money. Yeah. We're the exclusive home of basketball gaming. And buy this because, we're the exclusive home of basketball gaming, and we're giving you college content, college DLC. And that's going to hit their bottom line. So just ridiculous stuff. If you want to see some of that, go on social media, put in like NBA 2K college content, and you'll see some of the, misspelled names and the wrong logo on shirts and all of that stuff.
It's disappointing. And it is nice to see people calling it out. But, of course, there are always going to be people who say, oh, just be grateful that it's there. At least we're getting it. And yes, it is nice to have this content. But again, this is no longer just bonus content. This is core content. This is paid DLC. This is content that's tied to microtransactions. You need to do better. You need to do a good job of this. You're thumping your chest. You're saying you're the exclusive home of basketball gaming. Nobody does it better. Nobody's ever done it better than 2K. The most amazing basketball games ever. Not for a while, to my mind. I don't think 2K has been a fantastic game to me for most of this generation, unfortunately. I know some people may disagree. That's fine. I've just not felt this generation of NBA 2Ks. I don't feel the love. I don't see the attention to detail. I don't see the quality that they were once known for. And yes, there were always some ratings legends that were off, a position that was wrong, some kind of inaccuracy. I don't think, Derek, there's ever been a single basketball game from EA, 2K, or anyone else that has been 100% accurate. That we could say, oh, there's no ratings that are wrong, there's no inaccuracies in the design, it's absolutely perfect. That is a very high bar, but the level of quality, again, the quantity over quality, has never been this bad. And again, tying to paid DLC and microtransactions, it's just disgusting. Get it right.
So and I looked this up too. It stated that the college basketball content featuring 16 NCAA programs introduced in NBA 2K26 Season 5 includes a mixture of both free, earnable content and premium paid content. Here's a breakdown of the college content in Season 5, starting on February 20th, 2026, which was a few days ago. Included content. The update adds 16 men's and women's college programs, including Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, UConn, UCLA, etc., to My Team and My Career, featuring authentic jerseys and courts. The free content is all players can redeem a free college celebration box in the market to get 5 free agent option packs. premium content, many, if not all, of the high-tier desirable items, such as specific player cards, court cards, and jersey cards, are part of the Pro Pass, paid season pass, or require opening packs with virtual currency. So, yeah, again, it's tied behind gambling mechanics, Andrew, right? And it's tied behind paid DLC and whatnot.
Season passes, battle passes,
that is a damn shame. Yeah, it's a damn shame. And I just wanted to get that out of the way. This isn't about the college content. However, if you think about it, more than likely they're going to start trying to throw retro content in there, probably.
Right?
College related.
Oh, yeah.
So, look out for the inaccuracies there.
Well, I've been playing some NBA 2K17 recently. I do enjoy going back to the PlayStation 4 version because I did buy the All-Time College DLC back in the day. And it's fun to have those teams, and they're actually in the PC version as well. It's a paid unlock. Remember when that was the biggest controversy in gaming, Derek? Paid unlock DLC, and now we just accept that and so much more as a community. But yeah, I'd like to unlock that on PC. Until I do, I play it on the PS4 version where I did buy it. Those teams are fun to use, especially because there are some players that aren't on the other classic teams, so that's the only way that you can access them. But again, it was kind of poorly done. You've got some very unbalanced teams, some teams that are really guard-heavy or really power forward and center-heavy, some players that they definitely could have included. You can't view the stats when you're using the all-time college teams in NBA 2K17. I don't know what they did there. It probably comes down to some mechanics that are also tied to the college portion of my career, I'm guessing, but to that point, kind of sloppily done. So it is nice, but it was kind of overpriced, really. Stuff that really should have been in the game by default. So this has been going on for a while. It's one of these issues that's just been ramping up. More and more people are finally noticing it, thankfully. But yeah, the attention to detail, the lack of quality, unfortunately goes back years.
Yeah, the inaccuracies, rush jobs, spreadsheet copy and paste, that goes back like a decade.
Or more,
and maybe a little bit more. And I also want to point out, too, that the reason why they were able to get away with it, I think, a little bit more back then is because the games played better, right? And I think that the games weren't as greedy. They were, they didn't have as much time to microtransactions. My team, I think, played better and more fair, and it was more fair to the gamer. Yeah, and I just, you go back and you use some of those classic teams in those games, even where there were rush jobs, and the game plays better. So, yeah, and the game's more fair to you, right? And so I think that, people didn't notice it as much. I think they play far worse on the PS5 gen of NBA 2Ks.
And yeah, they've been turning up the heat on increasing the greed.
Yeah, something else that I'd like to see in the future for retro and classic content is allow a create your own classic teams roster option, where you can grab teams from the My NBA Eras rosters and the classic teams and create your own ultimate classic teams roster. That'd be pretty cool, right? I think a lot of people would use that. So let's say you can create a roster and it says select the teams that you would like, and you can go through all the My NBA Eras, all the classic teams and whatnot, and just pick and choose which teams you want. And then you can throw that roster into a My NBA Online, or you can throw it into your own personal My NBA and play it locally and whatnot. Maybe you can share it, etc. This is my ultimate classic teams roster. That would be cool.
Oh, I'd love to see that. Absolutely. And that also addresses an issue that I have with My NBA Eras and the classic teams as it currently stands. Look, I love the concept of My NBA Eras, love the concept of classic teams, and I'm glad that they did introduce Play Now eras, because that was originally a glitch that people found, that you could do that. I actually made a video on how to access that, and by the time I uploaded the video, unfortunately, they patched that functionality out, that debug functionality out, but then they added it in the next seasonal update, and it's been a feature ever since then, which is great. I'm glad that you can bring up the 1992 rosters and play with those 92 teams, but unfortunately, you can't mix and match, to your point. You can't say, take the 92 Clippers from the Jordan era and put them up against the 2003 Clippers from the Kobe era. Would you necessarily want to do that matchup? Maybe, maybe not. But my point is, you can't use them between eras. You can't use them like regular classic teams. They are separated into those eras. And I understand why, and it still works, and it's great that you can use them as is, but I'd love to be able to use them as traditional classic teams, because there are some teams within those eras rosters that would be great to have as classic teams, and to be able to put on the floor against the current NBA, or a different era, or one of the classic teams, but you can't do that. And it's little things like that that do bother me, because it feels like we have this great historical content, or potentially great historical content, and it's all a little bit too separated.
Oh, I definitely agree. I wanted to recap real quick what I would like to see for the future of retro and classic content in the NBA 2K series. One, and this is the most important, is the accuracy needs to be improved. Put people on the rosters who care, that know basketball and know their history. No more copy and paste ratings, signatures, etc. Get people on those rosters that care, make those rosters a priority, and represent those players in the history of the game the right way. And in turn, people are going to love using that content. Also, another one that I didn't mention earlier, but allow us to start in any season. They have branding that carries over from season to season. It would be cool to be allowed to start in any season.
Definitely.
Make my team more balanced again. We're getting players who are great at specific things. Matters. The gameplay mechanics need an overhaul for these teams to be great. I do want to mention that. So hopefully the gameplay improves in the series, foot planning, less suction, more control, better feeling and mechanics related to the shooting, etc. So hopefully that improves. Represent the ABA. I'd love to see the ABA represented in the future of NBA 2K. Maybe you start it at the beginning of the ABA if you can get enough licenses for that. And, you move forward through the seasons, or maybe just a historic season of the ABA, et cetera. So that would be cool to see the ABA represented. And then also, like I stated, allow a create your own classic teams roster option. And one more, actually, Andrew, fix the art. That I think that a lot of the art is off. I think that a lot of it doesn't carry over accurately to the new seasons. I think some of that art, I'd like to see that improved in the future.
Oh, I agree with all of that. And having that accuracy, that attention to detail throughout the retro rosters, the classic content, is absolutely vital. It has to be a priority. Again, not to harp on the point, but this is core content. This is not just some extra bonus content. This is not like the all-time teams in NBA 2K6 where you earn the VIP points, you go into the crib, you buy the mini basketballs, and you've got those extra teams. And even so, you still want to see attention to detail there, but that wasn't as big of a deal as the classic content they have now. You need to have that attention to detail. You need to put the effort into that mode. These errors have been there for years. It's well overdue to fix them. I love the idea of being able to start at any point. In lieu of that, I would certainly accept a few different starting points within an era, like a couple of 90s starting points, a couple of 2000s, couple of 80s points, beginning of the decade, later in the decade, or mid-decade, whatever. Even if they could have just a couple of starting points to choose from, I'd love to see that. Make sure you have the accuracy of the art changing throughout the years. You have the art, you have the system in place to change it. Again, attention to detail is vital, because you're selling it on this idea of the league will change, the league will evolve as it did in real life. Well, it needs to represent real life accurately. It needs to represent history accurately. I'd like to see some more teams be made into classic teams, or like you said, be able to take them out of the era's rosters and cobble together your own Ultimate Classic Teams roster. Absolutely. I do want to see some more flexibility of using those teams between eras, being able to mix and match, but also adding some more classic teams that deserve to be celebrated. Take some of those teams out of my NBA eras, well, leave them in the eras rosters, obviously, but also have a copy available to use outside of those eras rosters, if that's what it's going to take. Make them classic teams as well. And obviously, CTC. Cut the check. These are very reasonable terms that these former players are putting out there. Reggie Miller, Rasheed Wallace, Charles Barkley especially, looking out for the retired players. You can absolutely afford it. It's going to pay for itself. Do the right thing, CTC, look after the retired players, inspire that goodwill, and like you said, Derek, that's probably going to lead to more deals being made with retired players if they show that goodwill, if they're willing to take care of those players as well. So yeah, overall, more effort needs to be put into this classic content, because at this point, it's too big of a chunk of the game to not put in the required time and effort.
Yeah, and just a reminder again that so much of it is tied to a money-making mode in my team. So just keep that in mind.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
Let's get to the community's responses related to this topic, Andrew. I asked basketball gamers, what would you like to see be the evolution of classic and retro content in NBA 2K? Currently, we have in My NBA Eras, all-time teams, classic teams, and My Team content. And Jonathan Watson at Johnny Gamer states, if 2K can find a way to feature the classic NBA on NBC theme and graphics, that would be great. Yeah, I mean, obviously the presentation piece is important to a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, NBA on NBC is incredibly classic.
And they obviously do have that theme in there for the 90s era. But yeah, once again, full presentation would be amazing.
Hokup Guy at Hokup Guy states, better retro accuracy. And I think he's talking about accuracy in general, the art, the way the players play, the amount of missing players, etc. We completely agree there.
Yeah, he's done some fantastic work with his own rosters and so forth and mods over the years, with the Jordan Challenge especially. So he is all about historical accuracy, as we are. And again, it's vital. It's what this content is supposed to be.
Yeah, Hokup Guy, another community member with the knowledge, right, who would make these rosters a priority and probably do it for free. Right? Gameface Inc. at Gameface Inc. states, more details for those older teams and arenas they played in, have players get older throughout the years, make the teams with the style of how they played in those years, don't lock classic players behind My Team game modes. Definitely agree with that last point in
That's a big one.
A big way. Yeah, and then make the teams play with the style of how they played in those years. How many times have I thrown on a classic team over the last, 6-7 years, and I'm running on the fast break. Let's say I'm using a Magic Johnson team and whatnot, and I'm running on the fast break, and instead of going to the hoop, James Worthy or Byron Scott, they flare out to the 3-point line, right? That's not accurate for those errors. Byron Scott isn't spotting up for a 3, and James Worthy isn't flaring out to the mid-range or whatever, on a fast break. They are diving. They are going to the hoop. They are running their lanes. So that's, I think, what he's talking about. You use those classic teams, and they're not playing like they did in that era. They're playing more like the modern game. And I think that speaks also to the rushed attributes, rushed tendencies, etc.
Yeah, it comes back to authenticity once again. And I do like the idea of players being able to age throughout the years. I know that they do have a couple of faces for some of the players that will swap in, but they do it kind of randomly and erroneously. It's funny, I can't remember if it was NBA 2K23, probably NBA 2K24 actually, where I simulated through the first season in the Jordan era to get to the 93 campaign. I wanted to check out the Suns branding, which of course was incorrect, but also quite amusingly, Derek, Michael Jordan was given randomly his 1986 face. So all of a sudden he'd de-aged and grown his hair back.
And how many people wish that were the case in real life? The whole Benjamin Button type scenario there. T Gentry at Bucky_T states, I love the My NBA eras and classic teams in 2K, but I truly love it if more love got put into the classic teams, players, courts, etc. Also would love if they added the ABA inside 2K. I also wish Sir Charles and the Nick Killer were in the game, but I understand that situation. Reggie Miller, we talked about Rasheed Wallace and Charles Barkley. Reggie Miller has been highly coveted for years. He has no interest in being in the game either. But how great would the marketing be if they could get him into the game? Again, thinking big picture. If they were able to get him into the game, you would see a ton of posts about it on social media. Maybe it would get other players in the game that are missing. You'd be able to throw him in that My Team mode, etc. So yeah, Sheed, Charles Barkley, and Reggie Miller.
You can kind of picture the social media marketing that they could do if they got those big three holdouts, if you will, into the game. You can just imagine their models standing there, all holding a basketball side by side, finally in the game, something like that. It'd be a huge deal. And again, they'd be doing the right thing by the Retired Players Association, by those players, giving them appropriate compensation. Yeah, that'd be huge. But yeah, it just feels so unlikely at this point.
Justin Francis at Justin Francis 7 states, more classic starting points and eras, 60s, 70s, late 80s, 95, 96, 06, 07. Getting the starting points in-game, especially for older seasons, opens up many opportunities for customization. 60s and 70s roster depth isn't there yet, but closer than most realize, especially the mid-70s. He continues, I know there are concerns about team and roster accuracy for eras rosters, but I personally love my NBA eras and encourage 2K to keep adding more classic seasons as starting points and retired players to allow us as gamers to let our imaginations run wild. Here's the deal. I completely agree with him about the idea of my NBA eras. I love it. We've talked about it many times. And we obviously want to encourage them to add more content because what happens? We as gamers can go in and try to fix it if we have enough time. However, I do want to point out that that shouldn't be the gamer's job to have to spend hundreds of hours to fix this content to make it fun and playable. And I think that that's where a lot of people sit. I feel like they, feel like they have to download a roster that's already been edited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they don't want to put these teams on the floor, or they don't want to very often because they play so poorly. So, well, yes, obviously I want their content in the game. I don't think it means much if it's not done accurately, if it's not fun to play, and if it doesn't represent the history of the game accurately. So, yeah, I agree with him to a point, but at the end of the day, I don't think anything is more important than how the game plays when you put these teams and players on the floor.
And Justin mentions the 60s and 70s roster depth isn't there yet, but closer than most realize. He has actually gone through and crunched the numbers. You can check that out on X. He's posted about that. He shared it in our forum as well. He's crunched the numbers, and yeah, there are actually very close to being some viable lineups going back a couple more decades, or bringing in the ABA. Certainly a lot of the players are there. So we're on the cusp of being able to have those eras potentially. Are they going to be much thinner than, say, the 80s, 90s onwards? Certainly. But the potential is definitely there. And Justin has done some great work crunching the numbers.
Moving over to Discord, Wizcard_Rush states, there are a few things I'd like to see added or brought back in future NBA 2K games. A classic moments mode similar to NFL 2K5, and the Kobe Challenge or Jordan Challenge for each era, celebrating the NBA's most iconic moments. Number 2, an official way to export a My NBA save as a Play Now roster. This can be done unofficially on PC by renaming files. Also reintroducing cross-share between console and PC. Yeah, I was disappointed when they got rid of that because I was using some of those rosters that were created on console with NBA 2K25, and then that feature got taken away. He continues, PS3 generations create a legend mode so you can play with any player from any of the available eras. That's a great idea. For number 4, he states adding more recent classic teams. 2019 Warriors is the last team. There are many I would like to see in the game in the default Play Now rosters. And finally, at 5, he states a true dedication to the attributes, tendencies, accessories, etc. for retro players to reflect their real-life counterpart, and as well as fixing the numerous bugs that plague my NBA that make the mods unplayable for some. Just some awesome ideas there. I really like a classic moments mode piece. And then the create a legend mode. I think that those are excellent ideas.
Absolutely. Fantastic ideas across the board. And once again, it's very clear to everybody who knows their stuff, because NBA 2K being a sim game, a big portion of the community, a big portion of the user base are hardcore hoopheads. They do know NBA history. The older gamers in particular and they understand, and they recognize the inaccuracies in the branding in My NBA Eras when it's not updating as it should, or there's mismatched branding. They notice the attributes that are wrong, the signature styles, the animations that are incorrect. You know, people notice these things, they realize it's not good enough. But yeah, once again, great ideas there. I love the idea of bringing back creating a legend mode. We didn't have that mode nearly long enough. Very cool idea. And again, I'm all for adding some more classic teams as well, both recent and going back years as well. I'm actually open to having some more unorthodox teams. Even without Sheed, I do like that they added the 2000 Blazers simply because it's a very memorable team. The 2000 Raptors as well, Derek, you know, not a very successful team, not a powerhouse, but having that young Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady together, having some more unorthodox choices, not just the all-time great teams and their opponents, but having some memorable teams as well. I'm not saying add the 2012 Bobcats. I don't think anyone wants to play with them, Derek. I mean, add them if you really want, I suppose, but they're not going to be a popular choice. Definitely a difficult one to play with online. But yeah, I'm all for adding more classic teams as well.
Andrew pushing for his baby Bulls to be added.
Those 2004 Bulls, yeah, that's a weird team, but yeah, it's interesting.
So that's it for Twitter and Discord. Do we get any responses on Facebook?
We did have a couple of people weigh in on Facebook as well. Brad says, I've recently discovered how wonderful player lock My NBA Eras is, so I no longer have interest in My Player, aka My Career. Previously, I would have said offline My Player, but now I don't care. I guess more real plays for my eras, which at this point I'm not even sure what it would take for me to buy a 2K now. I'm very happy with 2K24 between My NBA Eras and the W and WNBA franchise. I guess it would have to be Reggie Miller and Charles Barkley licensed. And I will say that I understand where he's coming from as far as using player lock in My NBA Eras. That is often cited as a solution to people who are sick of My Career and the grinding and the microtransactions. Of course, there is depth that you can't replicate there. I would like to see an offline My Career brought back. It is definitely viable. It is definitely possible to do. Unfortunately, that has fallen by the wayside with the MMORPG approach and the open world of the neighborhood and the city, but I would like to see offline My Career brought back, just as an aside there. And yeah, more real plays from My NBA Eras, done properly, of course. I think that's a great idea. And yes, getting Reggie Miller, Charles Barkley, and Rasheed Wallace into the game, I think would be a huge deal.
You mentioned the WNBA, and you know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see a WNBA Eras mode. And some of our listeners might think that's silly, but if you think about it, the WNBA has been around now for about 30 years. And, you know, you could have a season from the late 90s, you could have a season from the mid 2000s, and you could have a season from the early 2010s or mid 2010s. So like 3 seasons represented for classic content if they could get enough of those licenses to do so. And I would love to see Cheryl Swoops and Cynthia Cooper and Lisa Leslie and Rebecca Lobo and Shamiqua Holdsclaw and all of these classic players be available in the game. And you know what? If they can't do that, if they want to get some classic content in the game, let's go old school, Andrew. Let's get a free agent pool in there in the WNBA. You know, like a legends pool. And allow us to put some of those players on the rosters and use them offline. That would be really cool. But yeah, I'd love to see some of the classic players represented offline for the WNBA.
The Legends pool is underrated these days. I know we can trade the players. I know we can trade the players from the classic teams to create other classic rosters and all kinds of scenarios, but having that extra copy of those players that you can add to any team without ruining the existing teams, I think is very important. I think it's a very underrated feature. NBA Live did it, obviously. 2K hasn't. So yeah, I'd love to see 2K do that. And yeah, there are some WNBA legends in the game already as contacts in the W, and I believe you can scrimmage with them, face off against them, etc. So yeah, some representation there would be really cool. Even if you just have classic teams as well. You know, bring back those Houston Comets, that legendary Houston Comets team, and make them playable as a classic team. That'd be really cool. And finally, Sixth Man of the Year says Retro Draft Class versus Retro Draft Class. And yeah, a lot of those draft class teams were very popular back in the day. Just more fun bonus content, extra teams to play with, extra matchups to put on the floor, draft classes versus draft classes. Actually, speaking of Wizcard Rush, Derek, back in January he released a draft class team's roster project for NBA 2K25 PC. You can check that out in the download section. But yeah, that speaks to the popularity of that idea. People love the draft class jerseys, being able to put the draft classes against each other. Another bit of extra content, historical content, that's fallen by the wayside.
You could do that in some classic games. Yeah, exactly. Like NBA 2K10, which I've warmed up to a lot more over the last couple of years, each time I revisit it. It has the class of, 2003 in there. And I believe it has the class of 2008 and whatnot. You can, throw those teams on the floor and everything. And yeah, I think that's good content.
And what I think all these responses represent, Derek, is that people care about retro content and classic content. And that's why it's such a bummer that the attention to detail isn't there, that it doesn't feel like 2K does care, because it really is important to us.
Yeah, it's important, to represent the history of the game properly. And those players and those teams deserve that. And the consumers deserve that, putting money into these games. But yeah, thank you to the community for once again interacting with the show. Loved all the responses, loved all the ideas, and glad to see that there are so many people out there that are as passionate about the classic and retro content and the history of the game like we are.
Definitely. We are huge NBA history buffs, so that was very nice to see. And as always, please keep the conversation going. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder that you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media and would appreciate a follow. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC D43 and on YouTube D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.